And now for some analysis. Ruth Marcus is a columnist for the Washington Post. Matt Lewis is a senior contributor for the Daily Caller and has a new book out, Too Dumb to Fail. Nancy Cordes is our congressional correspondent, and Ed O'Keefe is with the Washington Post. Matt, let me start with you. Let's start with Cruz and Trump. Yeah. What is the nature of that conflict right now with 8 days to go before they start voting in Iowa?
Well, it's fascinating. Both of these guys are populist conservatives. So the establishment, it's not even an establishment versus a grassroots thing. These are two populist conservative kind of grassroots guys. And they're really two heavyweights in the middle of the ring duking it out over Iowa. I think if I had to bet right now, I think I still go with Ted Cruz in Iowa because of the ground game and because he fits so well with the evangelical thing. But they hugged each other for so long and refused to throw punches. And I do wonder if Ted Cruz might have been better off had he gone after Trump a little bit earlier.
Nancy, they're now throwing punches at such a rate. They may have thrown punches since I started talking in this question.
I'm sure they have.
They're not really working for Cruz, really, against Trump, at least as far as our polling and other polling is showing.
They're not, because he's now saying that Donald Trump is part of the establishment, which is a hard case to make when the establishment has spent most of this campaign essentially being openly horrified by Trump. And so, yes, to the extent that they're now marginally more supportive of Trump than Cruz, that's A, because their dislike of Ted Cruz is so personal, and B, because they believe that Trump might be slightly better at winning over some independents in a general election than Cruz. But it's not as if they're embracing Donald Trump against Cruz.
Well, it is weird. We had this last week. We're used to endorsements. We know what those look like. But there were more anti-endorsements this week than I've ever seen before. You had the anti-endorsements of Cruz from a number of Republican senators, and then you also then had the National Review, Ed, anti-endorsing Donald Trump. What's going on here?
Well, I think it's people panicking. And frankly, I think there are some Republicans who are saying, where were you months ago? You should have done this in October or November. You shouldn't be doing it 8 days before the caucus. And they've got a point. I think at this point, it's pretty clear. It's a two-guy race. And it's two people that establishment Republicans cannot stand and are going to have to live with one of them at some point soon.
There were plenty of good conservative writers who were calling out Donald Trump earlier. But I don't think that they really took him seriously enough. And in fact, a lot of them actually empowered him. I think the talk radio hosts, the Rush Limbaughs, the Mark Levins, were really helped by ignoring Trump and in some cases empowering him. This monster grew, and now it's too late to stop him.
Well, I'm not sure it's too late to stop him but I do think that it's important for us to understand we're talking about two different Republican establishments here. And actually, I hate to disagree about conservatives with Matt, but I think that Trump and Cruz are two very different candidates. There's the Republican conservative establishment, encapsulated, epitomized by the National Review, that we saw rising up against Trump as not a true conservative. And then we have the, for lack of a better term, Washington establishment, because they were all stuck at home on the snow yesterday. I spent a lot of the day talking to them. They are much more horrified by Cruz than by Trump, because Cruz would take them down a road of extreme conservatism in the party that Trump would not. Trump would have some potential, A, to be elected, and B, to attract some more moderate voters, because he is a much less mainstream movement conservative candidate than is Ted Cruz.
Nancy, you know the Hill well. You've covered it. Bob Dole and former Majority Leader Trent Lott, former Majority Leader of the Republicans, both said maybe Donald Trump, to Ruth's point, might make some deals in Washington. He might kind of work. Explain the antipathy for Ted Cruz among his colleagues, because that's when Ruth talks about the establishment in Washington, a lot of these establishment figures are senators who work with Ted Cruz, who are not fans.
What really angers them is that he has made even the most conservative members of the Senate look insufficiently conservative to their own voters. And they feel that he has sold Tea Party voters a bill of goods, in the sense that he railed against Congress, saying they're not being true to you, they could be doing this, they could be defunding Obamacare if they wanted to, they could defund Planned Parenthood if they wanted to, and they're just not doing it because they're afraid. And what the most conservative members of the Senate say is, we'd love to do that, but it's just not legislatively possible. So beyond that, beyond the fact that they think that he essentially misled voters. They feel that he did it for his own self-interest, to raise money, and that he put that ahead of the party.
It's both ideological and personal, the Washington establishment animus towards Cruz. But the concern that the other conservative establishment has about Trump, I think, is very valid and real, which is, you listen to his interview with you and the excellent question about his definition of conservatism. What didn't he mention? Limited government, the essence of the conservative movement. He never mentioned it at all. And by the way, for him to liken himself to Ronald Reagan, I really wonder what Ronald Reagan in heaven is thinking about the guy who buddied up with Vladimir Putin.
Well, yeah, except that in Republican politics, everybody likens themselves to Ronald Reagan.
Everybody does, but some with more basis than others.
Ed, let's talk about the other candidates who are not named Trump and Cruz. What's the state of that conversation?
There's a fascinating sort of sub-drama going on underneath, really among one senator and 3 governors, especially in New Hampshire. Anthony's numbers there really reflect it. The idea now that you've got John Kasich, Chris Christie, and Jeb Bush essentially running for 4th. And viewers at home might think, well, why does that matter? Because really, realistically, perhaps only 4 people are going to be able to get out of New Hampshire and make some kind of claim to continue on in this race. And so, you know, he was saying earlier that there's a real jump ball among Republicans who want to find a more mainline or establishment Republican, as some voters have described it to their faces, a grown-up Republican, to continue on, with the idea that come March, maybe even into April, there are races out there that those governors could do better in if those other 3 guys, chiefly Trump, Cruz, and Senator Marco Rubio, don't do as well.
Matt, there's an old cliche, you can't beat something with nothing. And so we have the anti-endorsements. People are very clear about who they don't like. But isn't the problem that there's nobody that they do like, that they've been able to rally around a single alternative to Trump and Cruz?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this weird phenomenon. My book is called Too Dumb to Fail for a reason. And it's because we have this weird situation where if you say something dumb or crazy, you go up in the polls. So there's this perverse incentive and a moral hazard to do that. Then you have some people who I think are much more responsible, optimistic conservatives in the vein of Ronald Reagan or a Jack Kemp. Someone like a Marco Rubio, he is, you know, he's on the edges, right? He's sort of like a football team who doesn't control his own destiny. He could still make it into the Super Bowl, but he needs some different things to fall. But if people had coalesced around Rubio earlier, maybe he might be in a better position today.
Ruth, what we're hearing now from some of the people in the Rubio camp is, well, he can wait till March 15th when Florida and Ohio are voting. The delegate math does get better for some candidates when they can win those later, winner-take-all states, but that's a long time after the voting begins.
I think I have a few words to that, which is ask President Giuliani how that worked out for him. By which I mean, you cannot discount the significance of momentum in politics. And if that's their argument, that's not the argument I'd want to be making. Look, there is a desire among a significant swath of voters. Anthony talked about this, the anti-Trump vote, and also there is an anti-Cruz vote. He is too conservative for a big segment of even the Republican primary electorate. But there's been an inability to coalesce, and there's been an inability of any of these guys to elbow everybody else out of the field. That's going to happen, but boy, waiting for it to catch fire, that's a tough one.
This is the thing that people need to remember. I mean, we have the first 4, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. We have March 15th in the distance, but it's everything that happens in between that is causing all this chatter about brokered conventions and the idea that someone like Cruz can still prevail, because you have all these states in the South who have proportional contests, and people are going to be able to pick up these delegates very slowly and methodically across the South and in Texas. And that is why there's so much concern still about the scattershot nature of this race, that if you don't have 3 or 4 guys solidly competing and eventually, you know, winnowing down to 1 or 2, that's why you might see this really chaotic situation towards the end of the process.
And look at those Trump numbers in Florida, winner take all.
Exactly.
Right. All right, we'll be back in a moment. We're going to talk about the Democrats, so all of you stick with us. We'll be right back.